For this podcast, we're going to be delving into a little bit of a different series. This series is gonna delve into a little bit of serial killers. These ones are going to be looking at a little bit of a different aspect, as other people have. Most people end up going into the actual cases themselves, and I'm going to be looking at other ways of the whole thing, of how these things played out, and show how the modern system might not have actually treated them in the same way as we see today. Now, in the first one, we're going to be looking at Ted Bundy, who was initially born in Vermont, but as we know, he grew up in Washington State. Uh, we know his crimes through the state of Washington, and he ended up getting initially arrested in Colorado. So he would have had arrest warrants for Colorado, but that would have been it, as we will show you later. Because what we're going to be going over is something a little bit unique. Because what we have is the Florida case. Now, the Florida case is a little bit odd because the only two things that end up busting him were forensic odontology and witness testimony. Now, as we know, witness testimony is skeptical at best, and you can pretty much throw that out because there have been a lot of people say, oh, this is the person, and that's not very, very likely. When this is used as actual testimony to actually lock someone up, it's considered to be a very, very weak case at best, because that's when we're going back to the idea of the Salem witch trials. Now, the reason why is because you can claim someone did something without any actual facts. Now, it doesn't matter that he had such things as handcuffs or any of these other things, because it's not illegal to have handcuffs. It's not illegal to have rope on you. Those things are, or any other what they deem as nefarious items. These things are not illegal to have. As noted, anybody can have handcuffs. I mean, there are some people that engage in certain after hours activities on their own that they do these things with it. So, and then for using handcuffs, so when it comes down to that, you can't exactly call that, or basically using handcuffs actually as a restraint for anybody who breaks into your house, or using it as an alternative to violent force for basically someone who's trying to rob you at gunpoint. You can use handcuffs. So we're talking that's not exactly a problem. When it comes to rope, you can go around to any household in the world and many cars around the world. You're going to find rope. It's a very common item. In fact, there's actually an industry that produces rope. This doesn't mean anything. You go into Home Depot, you can go in there and ask them for rope. They're not going to say, "Hey, this guy's a serial killer." That's another thing. So basically, these things aren't as exactly uh, something that would actually link someone to being a serial killer. Another thing that they've stated is that he was using occasionally ski masks. Well, people go skiing. There's also time where people use it when it's warm, when it's cold during the winter months. So that's not uncommon either. Well, especially in the areas when what he did for crimes in Utah and Colorado. Well, those are areas that do have many, many extremely cold months. Well, when we're looking at that, those areas are getting cold. You also have areas throughout, uh, like uh, Washington State. He's also been rumored to have been even in areas even like Illinois and some areas in the Midwest that can be very, very cold. So when it comes down to it, is there's no reason why he would not have had uh, a ski mask in his car or some type of thing to bind himself up when it's cold outside, or even be rumored not to have worn it at any time. So what we have now is we have basically hearsay, and we have that. Now another thing is what we have forensic odontology, which is what ended up busting him down in Florida. Now originally this was thought to be an actual legitimate science, but what we find out with what John Stossel did a report on May of last year is that basically is that through DNA testing we find out that people that were busted on forensic odontology, they found out that this was essentially a junk science, that there was no legitimacy to it. And when we look at this, this shows that if he was busted on witness testimony and forensic odontology down in Florida, this makes the case against Ted Bundy very, very weak. Now, yes, he did confess to killing over 100 people in prison later at a later point, but that does not mean that he meets a constitutional basis for being in prison. You actually need legitimate evidence. Could they have gotten legitimate evidence at a later point? Yes, but that doesn't mean that he should have been arrested at that point. He essentially should have been free up until they started using real legitimate forensic evidence, and he would have essentially been free until at least the later 1990s, when they started actually legitimately using forensic evidence such as DNA testing, which is when he would have been actually busted the very same way that the Green River Killer was busted, which he was actually one to help tip off people for how to catch the Green River Killer as well, as he was one of the people they actually went to ask about. Which is when you'll learn more about him, you'll see that he is actually kind of one of those enigma figures of both kind of positive and negative, that makes him a little bit of an interesting figure when it comes to serial murder, that kind of makes him stick out from a lot of the others. Not saying that he's some person to be admired, not which is, you don't want to admire any of these people, but at least it makes him kind of stick out as a person who's done both good things and bad things. He worked as an actual crisis talk line agent, and he's done many positive things in his life, but he's also done many. You also have all the things of serial murder and serial rape, which are on his record, which need to be considered as well. So he has this essentially yin and yang for his whole life, which makes him quite an interesting figure to look at. This is why I actually started with him, and why he ends up being very, very interesting. And the other reason is because when you look at the evidence that brought him down, it would essentially be thrown out in court today because it doesn't withstand the actual level of scrutiny. When we look at the level of scrutiny that you need to essentially get something that's considered as valid science, and not this means something as DNA, something such as fingerprints. Some things such as witness testimony are guarded as a lot lower, because the fact is memories tend to fade as time goes on, and they're not considered accurate because of you can have a lot of bias in the way people end up displaying it. You can have a personal vendetta against someone, and this is why you'll get people stating this. You can have what are called recalled memory treatments, which have been basically thrown out of court for the reason that these essentially can be implanted memories. This is why the situation with Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court would have basically been would never have been allowed to even approach a legal standing, because what was going on was we saw a person that at best was either A, creating a fabrication with Dr. Ford, or B, she had with her opinions on recalled memory was basically had the treatment herself, which means that basically these were equal to implanted memories. This means that there was no legitimacy, as the court had essentially way back in the mid 1980s had already stated that these were essentially erroneous, and this doesn't stand as actual real testimony. And this is why the courts create these standards, is because we don't want the actual courts to create a situation where you're sending innocent people to jail. The court would rather let a guilty person go free than send an innocent person to jail. And that's why we have a system of innocent until proven guilty. They'd rather have the guilty people go free than your innocent people go to jail. And that's and even with this, we've still have erroneously still accepted a lot of different forms of evidence, such as forensic odontology, without really examining what it really means and is it really that accurate. And we found out that it's basically its accuracy is very, very low, and this is the whole problem. And while it may have grabbed a guy like Ted Bundy, it wouldn't have grabbed really anybody else. And but theoretically, Ted Bundy should have essentially, because of this other questionable nature of the science, he should have been let go, or basically made to serve out his sentence out in Colorado and be let go after that because of the case. And this is where we're at, because there was no DNA evidence. There was only basically people saying, well, we saw what he looked like. Well, if it was dark out, which it was, there would be, that makes it very, very hard to make the call of what he looked like. And this is the stuff that he actually brought out to the case. Essentially, his case was actually put together quite well, and he even questioned the quality of the actual science itself, which if it were in today's standards, he would have actually won the case, and essentially just been reported right back to Colorado to serve the rest of his sentence, where he actually broke out of jail. And this would have been the end of the whole situation. He would have been sent back for essentially escaping jail, released after that point, and essentially you've been released by pretty much late sometime during the 1980s, and or most likely the early 1980s, and then he would have essentially been released at that point, and then they would have had to get wait until pretty much the point of the late 1990s to get him actually on real legitimate evidence, which means real forensic evidence, something like fingerprints, something like DNA, which they had none of. When you have none of that, you can't send a person to jail. And this is the whole point. When people have actually been released upon that, and the fact is, I'm not saying that he was not they did not execute the right guy uh, in that case with it. Though I do not believe in the death penalty. Uh, this is the case where basically you need to follow the law as written and make it innocent until proven guilty. They essentially did not prove their case because they were using junk science. Now, if you like this, I'll give you like it, subscribe, click the bell, share it all around, and I will get you more of these things as I see fit. And I will see you guys later on. I'll see what if I want to do another post later on tonight, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.